Well, to be honest, I don't even know if I would use that language because I don't really have a want on how I want them to get. I want them to grow and change, but I also want them to surprise me.
What's up, Story Geeks? It's my third video in a series with Caleb Monroe. Today we're talking about character arcs and how to do a compelling character arc. Please click that like button for me. If you've got a question, please leave it down below. We'd love to answer that question for you. And don't forget to subscribe. Let's dig deeper into character arcs.
So let's talk about character arcs, because character development is sort of like the bigger picture, but the arc is specific to the writer's craft in determining how they get the character from one point to another. So, so for you personally, when you take character development and then break it down into a character arc that moves and transforms throughout a story, how do you personally try and measure that? Is there a way you measure it? Is that you talked about intuition before, and I think that's really fascinating because I'm not an intuitor. So I want to hear, like, how do you know that a character has moved and developed and gone through an arc in the way that you wanted them to?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I don't even know if I would use that language because I don't really have a want on how I want them to get. I want them to grow and change, but I also want them to surprise me. And that means I am very open to them changing in a different way than I'm planning at the beginning of this story.
Okay.
That said, I think that the character, I think we like all things, we get really complicated, but just like stories are beginning, middle, and ends, I think a character arc is 3 points. It's you could say beginning, middle, end. I think maybe a better word with characters is synthesis, antithesis, and synthesis. I mean, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So at the beginning, your character believes something about the world. As the story progresses, they find out that maybe the opposite is true, and they wonder if they should believe the opposite. And at the end, they find out that it's by looking at both of those sides that they're able to find a third synthesis way forward. That's a very, very almost philosophical way of, I mean, it comes from a philosopher, Hegel.
Yeah.
But basically, in my mind, so I had this, long ago, I was an assistant for the screenwriter, director, Zach Helm. He wrote Stranger Than Fiction and wrote and directed Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium. And I learned so much from him just over lunch conversations. and one day we were talking about a script, and he was having a little trouble with one of the more minor characters. And he's like, well, he was talking about how having trouble with that character's arc. And as we talked about it, what we discovered is because there was only 2 points in the character story. They started here and then they went here. And that's not an arc. We use the word arc for a reason. It's not a straight line. And so we just realized there just needed to be a third place. He just needed to go here and then here. And then that, you know what I mean? And that's the simplest version of character arc. But I think sometimes we lose the simplicity of what we're doing underneath a whole lot of layers of diagrams and what have you. So much like, I think, really everything we do is for us to try to find a language to say, how do we make a good beginning, a good middle, and a good end?
Right.
And with character development, I think it's the same thing. How do we have a good starting point, a good middle part, and a good point conclusion? And so for me, because I'm a muse, I kind of have a rough idea of what the next point on that arc is. I usually don't think too seriously about what the third one is going to be. Because by the time I get to the second point, the character has probably done things I wasn't expecting. And so so the conclusion that they're going to reach is probably going to be different than what I'm thinking. And this is my process.
Yeah, totally.
Because I tend to see a story from inside it than over it.
Nice.
Which I think is another difference between muses and mechanics.
Yes.
So I just think, well, here's the next point. Here's where this character is going.
Right.
And then again, it's very relational for me. I'm like, okay, what would it take for you to, what would it take for you to go from believing this to believing that? And so much of your plot is just the things that you have to do to your character to break them down or transform them in a way that they will see the world differently than they did at the beginning.
Yeah.
Once they've reached that point where they see the world differently, then you just do that again, getting them to a third point. And that's how I approach character.
I love this. I love this. So can you break down the thesis, that like those 3 points? Can you break those down a little bit into what you mean by those?
Yeah, sure. Let me see if I can think of an example.
Yeah.
So Craig Mazin uses an example for this from Finding Nemo, and I will see if I can remember what it is. So essentially, the thesis is it's a dangerous world, and because I love my son, I have to protect him.
Got it.
The antithesis is Dory, who's just totally in the moment,
right?
And she's not. It's not about the world and the dangerous world. It's about right now, and it's about the now relationship, not the thing that happened years ago that scarred you, or all the things in the future that you fear. It's now. So she's the antithesis to his thesis, and at the end, Marvin reaches a synthesis of those 2 points. He's not at either of them, but he reaches this understanding that, okay, in order to love something well, it has to have freedom. It has to have that freedom of living in the moment like Dory, but that's how you love them well, is you give them that.
Yeah.
So that's a really quick example. Pixar movies are always very clean when it comes to these things. So it's,
right.
But that's sort of the type of thing. So your character starts out, they believe anything.
Yeah.
They get, now some people say that the antithesis needs to be the opposite of that.
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it just needs to be different. They believe something about the world, and then they are presented and tempted to believe something else. And it's by being caught between those 2 things that they realize, oh, it's not either or, it's the third choice.
Yeah.
And that's where they end up.
Got it. I like that a lot. My history with character arcs, it's so good to talk to somebody who is in many ways thinks about stories, the overarching type, like why we do story, and we have a shared understanding of what that is and why we do it, and yet our approaches are so different. Because being a mechanic, it was a long time for me to understand. You mentioned earlier in a previous video that we were talking about, and you said that you have a good intuition, right? And we also were talking about earlier. We were talking about Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and stuff like that. My Myers-Briggs is I am not an intuitor even at all. I have to judge the thing and have other people judge the thing to really calibrate where this is at, right? And so for me, Leos agrees the art of dramatic writing gives a framework for character development that I've really gravitated toward, because what he basically says is, he says we all want to understand, just like we talked about with stories, understand the world better. And so how you break down the character's arc is essentially, how did the character go in that arc? Like you said, it's not a straight line. How did they go from point A to point B in the arc, right? And you had 3 points in there, so A, B, C, or however many points you're going to take.
Right.
And that was instrumental for me in my writing to understand, okay, what events happen to this character, or what does this character decide to do, or what does another character decide to do to this character that takes their emotional state from point A to point B to point C, and then however many points it needs to go to get to the other activity. And the illustration that I like to use, because most people are so familiar with it, is what George Lucas gives us with Star Wars, where he says the path to the dark side is fear, leads to anger, leads to hatred, leads to suffering. Then you're on the dark side. And so that, like, breaking that down as a mechanic to say, this character, I want to go through this type of journey. Now, granted, we've already talked about this a lot, but the character will consistently not want to go where you want them to go, and then you have to figure out like why that's happening, and then trust the character, respect the character. But that has been really instrumental to me. So that's the framework I tend to use. I tend to sit down and say, okay, where is this character's arc going, and how are they getting from point A to point B, and how are they getting from point B to point C, and then going through that, looking at that journey that way. So But I like
Yeah.
I like the thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That's cool.
That's it for today's video. Special thanks again to Caleb Monroe for joining me today. If you like this video, please hit that like button for me and also subscribe to this channel. Next week, we're going to be talking about something really cool, how to write a horror story and what drives the genre. If you want to listen to the full unedited conversation between Caleb and I, then check out our Patreon account. If you support us over there, you get access to all of that. Patreon.com/TheStoryGeeks. We would appreciate your support over there. In the meantime, I'll see you on the next video.